2 weeks ago, Henry's wife Laura had gone to visit their daughter Jane and her husband Ryan. It was supposed to be a short trip, just a few days of family time. But when 3 days passed without a single call or message from Laura, Henry's heart began to tighten. So, on a quiet Saturday morning, he decided to surprise them. "She'll smile when she sees me at the door," he said to himself, gripping the steering wheel a little too hard. The highway stretched endlessly before him, the kind of road that made you think too much. His phone sat in the cup holder, silent, black, and mocking. "Come on, Laura," he muttered, tapping the screen again. Still no message. The last voicemail he'd left that morning sounded desperate, even to his own ears. "Honey, I'm worried. Please just call me back." He drove past the exit signs counting down the miles to Orlando. 40, 35, 30, with every passing sign. His stomach twisted harder. What if something had happened? What if this surprise visit turned into something far darker than he'd planned? The more he thought about it, the heavier the silence inside the car became. He tried to shake the thought away, reminding himself of Laura's words before she left. "Jane's just been under pressure lately," she'd said. "You know how life gets when money is tight." Henry remembered those words now as he stared at the road. But deep inside, he couldn't forget how strange Jane's recent calls had become, always circling back to money. Repairs, debts, bills, talk about updating their will. "She's just being responsible," Laura had told him. But to Henry, it hadn't sounded like responsibility. Had sounded like calculation. When Henry finally reached Jane's neighborhood, everything looked perfect. Clean lawns, parked cars, trimmed hedges, quiet streets. Her house stood at the end of a cul-de-sac, peaceful under the Florida sun. For a moment, he almost laughed at himself. Maybe he'd overreacted. Maybe Laura had dropped her phone in the pool, or maybe the battery had died. He got out of the car, holding a small bouquet of flowers, and walked toward the front door. "Wait till they see me," he said softly, smiling. But when he pressed the doorbell, nobody came. He rang again. Still nothing. He tried calling Jane, no answer. Ryan, straight to voicemail. The silence around the house started to feel wrong. Then a voice called out suddenly from next door. "Sir. Wait, don't go inside." Henry turned and saw a man hurrying across the lawn, waving. "I need to tell you something," the man said, breathless. "Are you Laura's husband?" Henry froze. "Yes, who are you?" The stranger took a step closer, his face tense. "My name's Robert. I live next door. You need to know, something terrible happened here last week." Henry's heart began to pound. "What do you mean something terrible happened?" he asked, his voice trembling slightly. Robert glanced back at Jane's house before answering. "There were screams," he said quietly. "A woman's voice, begging for help. It happened late at night about a week ago." Henry's mouth went dry. "Screams," he repeated. Robert nodded. "Yes, I called emergency services, but your daughter and her husband told me it was just a nightmare. When the ambulance arrived, they brought a woman out on a stretcher. I swear it was your wife." Henry felt his knees weaken. "Laura," he whispered. "Are you sure it was her?" Robert looked at him sadly. "I saw her face under the porch light. She could barely move. The paramedics rushed her to the ambulance, and Jane and Ryan just stood there, watching. They didn't even follow the vehicle." Henry's breath hitched as cold shock flooded through him. "Which hospital did they take her to?" he demanded. "I don't know," Robert said. "I thought her family would handle it." But the next morning both of their cars were gone. "Haven't seen them since." Henry pulled out his phone, his fingers shaking as he dialed emergency services. "My wife, Laura Morgan," he said quickly. "She was taken from 847 Meadowbrook Lane about a week ago. I need to know where she is." The operator typed rapidly on the other end. "One moment, sir." The line went silent except for faint background music. Seconds dragged like hours. Finally, a voice returned. She was taken to Orlando Regional Medical Center at 12:43 a.m. on June 8. Henry closed his eyes in relief and dread. "Thank you," he whispered and hung up. He turned back to Robert. "I'm going to the hospital," he said firmly. "You should call the police and tell them everything." Robert nodded, his face filled with concern. "I'll give a statement, Mr. Morgan." "I'm so sorry." Henry didn't respond. He was already heading toward his car, his mind spinning. The drive to the hospital felt unreal. Streetlights blurred past as he gripped the wheel tighter, the world around him a dull hum of fear. "Please be alive, Laura," he murmured. "Please hold on." When Henry arrived at the hospital, the air smelled of antiseptic and quiet panic. He rushed to the front desk. "My wife, Laura Morgan," he said breathlessly. "She was brought in a week ago." The nurse checked the computer. "Yes, sir. She's in the ICU, room 412. Henry's chest tightened. "Can I see her?" "One moment," she said, picking up the phone. Within minutes, a woman in a blazer approached. A detective. "Mr. Morgan?" she asked. "I'm Detective Lisa Thornton. I need to speak with you about your wife's condition." Henry's pulse quickened. "Please just tell me, how is she?" Detective Thornton studied him with calm eyes. "She's in stable condition now, but she's been through a lot. The doctors say she was poisoned." Henry blinked, stunned. "Poisoned?" he repeated softly. "Yes," the detective replied. "A dangerous mix of sleeping pills and heart medication. The dosage could have been lethal." Henry's breath caught. That can't be right, who would? But the answer was already forming in his mind, and it terrified him. "Your wife was conscious when paramedics arrived," Detective Thornton continued. "Barely, but conscious. We've been trying to locate family members. She mentioned your name before she passed out again." Henry stared at the floor, his jaw tight. "And my daughter?" he asked quietly. "Jane and Ryan." The detective hesitated. "They weren't at the hospital when we got there. The neighbor said they didn't follow the ambulance. We've been trying to reach them, but both phones are off." Henry's hands clenched into fists. "Find them," he said. "Please find them." When the detective led him to room 412, Henry froze in the doorway. Laura lay pale and still against the white sheets, tubes running across her body. Machines beeped softly beside her bed, each sound both comforting and cruel. He walked closer and sat beside her, taking her fragile hand in his. "Laura, it's me," he whispered, his throat tight. "I'm here now." The nurse adjusted the monitors quietly, leaving them alone. Henry sat there for hours, praying she would open her eyes, refusing to let go. The following morning, a small movement broke the silence. Laura's fingers twitched against Henry's palm. His heart leaped. "Laura," he said quickly, leaning closer. Her eyelids fluttered, then slowly opened. "Henry," she croaked, voice weak from the ventilator. He pressed her hand to his lips. "I'm here, sweetheart. You're safe now." She blinked slowly, confusion crossing her face. "Where am I?" "In the hospital," he said gently. "You've been here a week." Her brow furrowed as memory began to crawl back into her eyes. Detective Thornton returned with a recorder in hand. "Mrs. Morgan," she said softly, "can you tell us what happened that night?" Laura nodded weakly. "Jane made dinner. Pasta and bread. A few minutes after eating I felt dizzy, then my heart started racing. I told her something was wrong. I begged her to call an ambulance." She paused, swallowing hard. She said no. Said I'd eaten too fast. But I couldn't breathe. I told her again and she just looked at Ryan. Then he stood in front of the door so I couldn't leave. Henry's chest tightened as he listened, every word stabbing like a blade. Laura's voice shook as she continued. "I screamed. I thought maybe someone outside would hear. I kept begging but they wouldn't move. Then everything went dark. I remember a voice, someone shouting from outside. Then nothing until now." The detective turned off the recorder, her face grim. "Mrs. Morgan," she said gently, "the toxicology confirms what you described. This wasn't an accident. Someone mixed those drugs deliberately. Henry felt rage boil under his grief. They tried to kill her, he said through clenched teeth. The detective nodded slowly. We believe so. But we'll need strong evidence to prove it. Right now, it's her word against theirs. Henry stood, his voice hardening. Then find proof. Find whatever you need. I spent 30 years as a prosecutor. I know how this works, and I'm not letting them get away with this. Detective Thornton studied him for a moment, then nodded firmly. Understood. That night, Henry didn't sleep. He sat by Laura's bed, his mind racing through every possibility. He replayed Jane's phone calls, her sudden interest in wills and property, the tension in her voice when she'd mentioned money. She planned this, he whispered to himself. She and Ryan planned this. The nurse brought him coffee, urging him to rest, but he refused. I'll rest when justice is done, he said softly, watching the steady rise and fall of Laura's chest. The next morning, Henry made 2 phone calls, one to a private investigator, the other to a lawyer he'd known for years. I need you to look into my daughter and her husband, he told the investigator. Everything, finances, debts, communication records. I want to know what they've been hiding. The man didn't ask questions. Consider it done, he replied. Then Henry called his lawyer. James, it's time to protect everything we own. Rewrite the will. Jane's name comes off today. By noon, Henry had all the documents laid out on his desk. The new will left everything to Laura, and if she passed first, to charity. Not a single cent for Jane or Ryan. His pen hovered over the paper as he took a deep breath. This is the last kindness I'll ever do for them, he muttered, then signed his name. Back at the hospital, Laura managed a faint smile when he told her. It's done, he said quietly. They'll never touch what we built. Laura closed her eyes, whispering, Thank you. 2 days later, Henry met the private investigator at a quiet cafe downtown. The man was in his late 40s, sharp-eyed and efficient. Your daughter and her husband are drowning in debt, he said, sliding a folder across the table. Henry opened it and felt his stomach tighten. Credit cards maxed out. Mortgage payments missed. Gambling websites. Ryan's been betting thousands, the investigator continued. Sports, poker, online casinos. They owe close to $200,000. Henry exhaled slowly. So that's what all the sweet calls were about, he muttered. The investigator nodded. There's more, he said. 4 weeks before the poisoning, Jane called your estate attorney. She asked what happens if a parent dies without updating their will. She also asked how long it takes for an inheritance to go through probate. Henry's hands curled into fists. She was planning it, he whispered. They both were. The investigator leaned back. I've worked on many cases, Mr. Morgan. This wasn't desperation, it was calculation. They were betting on your wife's death to solve their financial problems. That afternoon, Henry met his lawyer, James Walker, a tall, calm man with years of courtroom experience. Walker flipped through the investigator's report carefully. This is strong, he said. The criminal court may take time, but a civil lawsuit can move faster. Henry looked at him curiously. You're suggesting we sue them? Walker nodded. Yes. Attempted murder, emotional distress, medical expenses. We freeze their assets, expose their lies, and let the evidence build pressure on them. Henry's eyes darkened with determination. Then let's do it. Back home, Henry found Laura sitting on the couch, wrapped in a blanket. She looked fragile, but her eyes had regained some of their strength. He explained everything, the debts, the investigation, the lawsuit. She listened quietly, tears gathering at the corners of her eyes. She really called the lawyer, she whispered. Henry nodded. A month before it happened. Laura looked down at her hands. All this time I thought she just needed help. I never imagined she'd want me gone. Henry placed a gentle hand over hers. We're done imagining. Now we act. The following morning, Henry called Jane. His voice was calm, almost gentle. "Jane," he said, "your mother's back home now. She wants to see you and Ryan. Maybe it's time we sit down and talk." There was a long pause on the other end. "Of course, Dad," Jane said finally. "We've been so worried about Mom." "Good," Henry said evenly. "Come by on Saturday at noon." When he hung up, Laura looked at him from across the room. "You're really inviting them here?" He nodded. "They won't see it coming." Saturday came bright and warm. Henry set the table, calm on the surface but storming inside. The doorbell rang at noon sharp. Jane walked in first, smiling nervously, followed by Ryan, who kept his eyes low. "Dad," Jane began softly, "we didn't mean for any of this to happen." Henry's expression didn't change. "Sit down," he said. Laura appeared from the hallway, standing tall despite her weakness. The color drained from Jane's face. "Mom, you're alive." Laura interrupted. "Yes, I am. Thanks to a neighbor who actually cared." The air thickened with silence. Henry placed a thick manila envelope on the table. "You'll be getting one of these soon," he said. "That's the lawsuit. $2 million for attempted murder." Jane's eyes widened. "Dad, you can't be serious." Henry leaned forward, his voice like ice. "You poisoned your mother. You left her to die. Don't pretend this was a mistake." Ryan tried to speak, but Henry cut him off. "You watched her beg for help. You both did. Now you'll beg in court." Jane stood abruptly, tears filling her eyes. "You're ruining our lives over a misunderstanding," she shouted. "It was an accident. Mom took those pills herself." Henry's face hardened. "Then why did you research lethal doses on your computer? Why did Ryan's prescription bottles match the poison in her system?" Jane froze, her mouth half open. Laura spoke quietly but firmly. "You had a choice that night, Jane. You chose money over love. That's not a mistake, it's betrayal." Jane's eyes flickered with guilt before she turned away. Ryan tried to steady his voice. "Look, maybe we can talk, Mr. Morgan. We don't have to drag this through court. I'm sure there's a deal we can make." Henry tilted his head, his expression unreadable. "A deal," he repeated. "You mean another trick to escape consequences?" Ryan swallowed hard. "We could save it," Henry interrupted. "You'll have plenty of time to talk when you're under oath." The doorbell rang again just then. Henry stood up. "That must be the process server," he said coldly. "Right on time." A knock echoed through the house. Henry opened the door and accepted a clipboard from the man outside. "Mr. Morgan?" the man asked. "Yes." The process server nodded. "They've been served." Henry watched through the window as the man handed Jane and Ryan thick envelopes. Jane's voice broke as she read the first page. $2 million, she gasped. Ryan's face went pale. Henry turned back toward Laura, his voice calm and steady. "It's begun," he said quietly. "Now justice will do the rest." 3 days later, Detective Thornton called Henry. Her tone was sharp with purpose. "We executed a search warrant this morning," she said. "Found Ryan's laptop and the prescription bottles. His browser history shows searches for lethal doses of the same pills your wife was given." Henry's pulse raced. "That's proof," he said quietly. "Yes," the detective replied. "We're moving forward with arrests tonight. Attempted murder and conspiracy." Henry hung up and looked at Laura. "They're going to jail," he said softly. She closed her eyes. Finally. That evening the news spread quickly. Jane and Ryan were arrested at their home, both in handcuffs as neighbors watched from their driveways. The local news station replayed the footage again and again. "Daughter and son-in-law accused of poisoning mother for inheritance," the anchor announced. Henry sat beside Laura, holding her hand as the story aired. "It's public now," he said. Laura's voice trembled. "I never thought our family would end up like this." Henry looked at her sadly. "They made that choice, not us." The next morning, Jane called from jail. Her voice cracked through the receiver. "Dad, please. You don't understand. Ryan made me do it. I was scared." Henry's silence was heavy. "Scared," he repeated. "You looked me in the eye while your mother was dying. That wasn't fear, Jane. That was greed." "I'm sorry," she cried. "Please forgive me." Henry's voice stayed calm. "Forgiveness doesn't erase consequences. You'll face what you've done." Then he hung up, his heart breaking quietly behind his steady voice. Ryan broke first. During interrogation, he confessed everything. How Jane had agreed to the plan, how they'd argued about timing, how she'd stood by while Laura begged for help. Detective Thornton called Henry afterward. "He's talking," she said. "He's giving us details we didn't even know." Henry exhaled deeply. Then the truth is finally winning. Laura listened quietly, her fingers trembling around her teacup. "They destroyed themselves," she whispered. Henry nodded. "Yes. Their greed wrote their own sentence." Weeks later, the trial began. The courtroom buzzed with reporters and murmuring voices. Jane sat at the defense table, pale and distant. Ryan avoided her gaze completely. The prosecutor laid out every detail: the debts, the forged prescriptions, the search history, and the poison found in Laura's blood. Laura testified softly, her voice calm but strong. "I begged my daughter to help me," she said. "She refused. My husband's love saved me, not hers." The courtroom fell silent. Even the judge looked shaken. Ryan took the stand next, confessing in full. "It was my idea," he said, his voice trembling. "But Jane agreed. We both thought the inheritance would fix everything." The prosecutor asked, "Did she ever try to stop you?" Ryan shook his head slowly. "No. She told me to make it look natural." A collective gasp moved through the courtroom. Jane lowered her head, tears spilling down her cheeks. Henry sat beside Laura, holding her hand tightly, steadying her as the final truth came crashing down. When it was Jane's turn to speak, she broke down completely. "I was desperate," she cried. "We lost everything, and I wasn't thinking clearly." Her lawyer tried to soften her story, painting her as a victim of bad decisions. But the judge saw through it. "You watched your mother suffer," the judge said sternly. "You didn't panic, you calculated." Jane sobbed uncontrollably as the verdict was read. Guilty on all counts. Ryan received 8 years in prison. Jane received 15 with no chance of early parole. Outside the courthouse, cameras flashed as Henry and Laura stepped into the sunlight. Reporters shouted questions, but Henry kept walking, one arm around his wife. "Do you feel justice was served?" someone called. Henry paused and looked at the crowd. "Justice isn't joy," he said quietly. "It's the weight that keeps the world balanced." Then he guided Laura toward the car. As the doors closed, Laura rested her head against his shoulder. "It's finally over," she whispered. "Yes," he said. "It's over." Weeks later, life slowly returned to peace. Laura's health improved, and Henry returned to small consulting work. They donated part of their estate to charity, rewriting their will so no one in their family could inherit it again. The house that once felt haunted by betrayal now filled with quiet laughter again. Some nights, Laura would sit on the porch and whisper, "We survived, Henry. We really did." And he'd smile faintly, replying, "We didn't just survive, Laura. We won." On a calm evening, Henry stood by the window, watching the sunset burn gold over Tampa Bay. Laura joined him, slipping her hand into his. "Do you ever think about her?" she asked softly. "Sometimes," he admitted. "But I think more about you, and how close I came to losing you." She smiled weakly. "You didn't. Because you fought." He turned to her, his voice gentle. "And I'll keep fighting for us, for what's right." Outside, the light faded, and peace finally settled over their home.